Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. This is an educational channel. This segment is called Bible Decode. This is number 511, and we take a look at things that your priest, pastor, pope, or rabbi doesn't want you to know. They won't answer your questions. They won't bring up this stuff. They will direct you elsewhere. And a lot of times uh, we have been surveying the ins and outs of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty in the late first century, were the true authors of the New Testament, which they wrote as a psychological operation against the Jews. They had really had continuous warfare with the Jews for over a century. And much of the motivation for the Jews was brought on by their messianic prophecies from Old Testament books that there would be a Jewish Messiah who would rise up and uh, as a military commander, and he would deliver the Jews from the occupying power, in this case, the Romans. And one thing clearly to be pointed out about the Jewish Messiah is that the Messiah was a human being, not a son of God, but a human being. And that the idea of a son of God is completely a pagan idea. All of the pagan gods of mythology and many of the even secular characters in legend, like Hercules or Socrates, they were all sons of God. And they all, came down to this planet and lived their lives, healed the masses, and imparted wisdom to them, and then were unjustly accused and executed, and then they rose back up to heaven. And that's pretty much the boilerplate or cookie cutter script for the mythological um, pagan uh, savior. And but for the Jews, the Messiah was a human and a military commander. And this drove much of the um, Jewish resistance to Roman occupation. And it led to the war, the 7 year long war, which was just a high point of a 125-year long period of intermittent wars and battles and fights and uprisings and revolts that occurred between 66 and 73 AD. And that a number of self proclaimed Jewish messiahs rose up and attempted to overthrow the Romans. And they were partially successful in basically kicking out the Roman puppet ruler from Jerusalem and, regaining control of Jerusalem temporarily until Emperor Nero of the Romans sent in General Vespasian and his legions, Roman legions, to put down the revolt. And, but this revolt continued for 7 years. Meantime, Nero was assassinated, a Roman civil war broke out, which included three more emperors being assassinated before General Vespasian was appointed the new emperor. He then appointed his son Titus to take over the military campaign. and he went to Rome to become emperor in 69 AD. That he was the first member of the Flavian dynasty, and his son Titus was second after Titus prosecuted this war. And so Titus led the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And then the war dragged on for a few more years after that, and it ended with a final battle at Masada, a fortress further south. And this is all described by the Jewish historian Josephus in his War of the Jews, which is, Josephus was uh, one of the military commanders for the Jews who defected to the Romans. And then um, he won a spot as court historian for the Flavians. He lived the rest of his life basically at Caesar's palace in a townhouse and wrote his 7-volume War of the Jews along with a 20-volume Jewish Antiquities and an autobiography and another book. So Josephus is kind of known as being like the most important historian of all time, if certainly of ancient times. Um, but when you look at it objectively, you can see that he is just a psychological operation, part of a psychological operation, and part of this New Testament psychological operation. Um, and, so there's a ton of circumstantial evidence for the Roman origins hypothesis. They had a motive, they had a method, they had a method that was consistent with, the Romans created a ton of other religions just at this very time. And the Romans, certainly had a motive, and they had the opportunity and the means to do this. And actually, nobody else did because the Romans had full control of censorship, publishing, and distribution within their empire. So nobody was really writing anything in the Roman Empire unless it was the Romans, the Caesars, the Caesars and their court, their agents. Um, Now, we're looking at a book that pursues this hypothesis from a slightly different angle. It's called Creating Christ by James Valliant and C.W. Fahy. And they have these ideas in mind, but what was the clincher for them was when they discovered a Flavian coin, a coin issued by Emperor Titus around 81 AD. And that coin has Titus on the front, and it has an anchor with a fish wrapped around it on the tails side. And this symbol, an anchor and fish combo, particularly a dolphin, uh, was the primary symbol set for the Christian church for its first couple centuries before the cross took over in about the early fourth century under Constantine, maybe about 330 AD. For over 2 centuries, the main symbol set for the Christians was the fish, and in general, it was wrapped around an anchor. And this is what appears in many of the old Jewish catacomb or the old Christian catacombs in Rome and elsewhere, and other iconography, other archaeological sites. This was the predominant symbol, whereas the cross was very rare prior to the fourth century. So these authors are wondering, why are the Christians using this anchor and dolphin set when the Roman Empire is using it at the exact same time. Especially if you accept the fact that Christians are being, sent to the lions by in the Colosseum by the Romans. Um, you would think that that they would try to avoid that by not using the exact same symbols to identify themselves. So they've covered this from various angles. We are in chapter 2 and going over some of the coinage and some of the other concepts here. According to one old source on Roman coinage, the dolphin was consecrated to Apollo, the sun god, who, according to Homer, had transformed himself into a dolphin. Hence, we see a Delphic tripod with a dolphin, a Delphic, like the oracle at Delphi, a Delphic tripod with a dolphin upon it on a silver coin of Vitellius, who was the emperor prior to Vespasian, who just ruled for a short amount of time. That emperor having, as the inscription teaches us, been one of the official appointed to the care of sacrificial ceremonies. A similar type appears on a denarius, which is a denomination of coin, on a denarius of Titus, but not with the same legend. This same source also claims that the dolphin entwined around an anchor was at one time a symbol of Augustus, the first Caesar from 27 BC till 14 AD, you know, um, after the Civil War, after Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. So it is also seen on coins struck by princes of the Flavia family, sons of Vespasian. However, one contemporary editor of a numismatic forum, numismatic is a collection of coins, editor of a numismatic forum corrects this by saying the emblem of a dolphin wrapped around an anchor appears on the reverse of silver denarii, um, produced by the Rome Mint during the reigns of the Flavian emperors Titus and Domitian between 79 and the early 80s. Here is that Augustus coin with the dolphin and trident motif. And so it's got the dolphin, but not the anchor instead of trident. So it seems that while dolphin, and even anchor imagery had been used by other emperors, the only Roman emperors to ever use the dolphin entwined anchor motif on coins were the Flavian emperors Titus and Domitian, although the latter seems to have dropped the image very quickly after Titus's death, which was also in 81 AD. And also Emperor Hadrian, who ruled from 117 to 138, and who would finish Titus's war 35 years later, which is called the Bar Kokhba uprising from 132 to 135 AD. And that is precisely what the Romans were trying to avoid with the creation of Christianity. They're trying to avoid another Jewish uprising. But this one was really the last one, because after this, Hadrian dispersed the Jews and they were pretty much kicked out of Jerusalem for the next 1800 years. In a limited edition after Christians had publicly adopted it, one can see many advantages for Titus employing the dolphin and anchor symbolism, since the anchor had been commonly stamped on coins of Seleucid and Jewish kings for centuries. Its use by Titus further associated him with both Hellenistic and Jewish monarchs of the East. Now, the Jewish coins had anchors on them, but not fishes. The Jews did not, that was a blasphemy for the Jews to have graven images like animals or humans on their coins. Anchor was fine. A plant, a palm tree or something like that was fine, but not an animal or a human. So this would not have been lost upon Titus's propagandists after he had conquered Judea, as this triumph was one of his family's chief claims to the throne. However, to depict the fish or dolphin figures with an anchor would have been blasphemy to the Jews. So the pairing of these figures in Flavian symbology, as Christians would also do, is as Christians would also do, is therefore exclusively pagan. Of course, the purely political use of the anchor on Jewish coins surprisingly becomes a religious symbol for early Christians, as it is on the coins of Titus, something that was expressly forbidden by Jews. And the same family of symbols so often used by the Flavians, fish anchors and tridents, was also Christianity's predominant symbology for its first 3 centuries. And what's interesting here is that this is exactly, precisely what is articulated in the New Testament, uh, where Jesus and Paul are both, you know, engaged in fights about the Jewish traditions and rituals. And both Jesus and Paul were in favor of being lax on the Jewish traditions, like the kosher food laws and the circumcision and the observance of the Sabbath. And, these are things that purity laws, these are things that, Jesus goes against the trend constantly. One time he doesn't wash his hands before he eats, and he, does work on the Sabbath, and he, um, is opposed to the circumcision, and he, even de-emphasizes some of the Ten Commandments. Paul is even worse. Paul goes directly against circumcision, and um, so this is what really allows the Christians to adopt this fish and anchor um, combo, where the Jews would never do something like that. So, a symbol from Roman imperial political propaganda used in the late first century was adopted by Christians within 3 or 4 decades, even at their grave sites in the city of Rome itself. We must ask again, why do we have such paradoxical coincidence of symbols from supposedly antagonistic groups almost perfectly overlapping each other in both time and place? The dolphin and anchor motif is one of the most commonly used on the coins of Emperor Titus. This makes it awkward enough as an appropriate Christian symbol by the conventional understanding. Adding to the paradox, Titus happens to have sacked Jerusalem and destroyed its famous temple just as Jesus predicted would happen within the time frame of his second coming. And I believe that's like Luke 19:43 or so, where uh, it's probably in the other synoptic gospels too, where Jesus predicts, the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem at the time that, within the lifetimes of people that are going to be listening to him at that time. And he says that that is a marker of the second coming of the Son of Man. So according to the Roman um, New Testament that they wrote, according to this hypothesis, um, which was generally mocking and ridiculing the Jews throughout. In this case, um, the culmination of the Jewish, um, lineage from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses to David and Solomon and all the way down to Jesus, then it goes to Titus, the Roman emperor, because Titus is the second coming of Jesus, because he is the one that destroyed the temple of Jerusalem in exactly the same manner that Jesus said he would. And that is written in the work of Josephus. And in Josephus being a Jew, so called, before he defected to the Romans. And the reason why he defected to the Romans is because he had a premonition that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews. And he also said that he felt that Vespasian and Titus were the Jewish messiahs. So this is a big part of the psyop, is what they call the new root and branch. So they take the root of Judaism and they prune the root of Judaism, but they graft the Roman pantheon, or well, the Roman um, Caesars, the Roman dynasty, the Flavian dynasty, onto the Jewish root. Titus happens to have sacked Jerusalem and destroyed its famous temple, just as Jesus predicted would happen within the time frame of his second coming. In the oldest archaeological evidence of Christians in the catacombs, as we have seen, Christians depicted fish and anchors juxtaposing each other to represent their affiliation. Let us now consider this mosaic, which was once at the bottom of an Olympic-sized pool in a public works in the city of Herculaneum, buried in 79 AD by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius during the reign of Emperor Titus. And so Mount Vesuvius blew, that's Pompeii, and Herculaneum was kind of the twin city of Pompeii. And this occurred like just a month or 2 months, I think, after Titus uh, took the throne. So the eruption of Mount Vesuvius during the reign of Emperor Titus. And remember that it predates by more than 2 decades any accepted archaeological evidence of Christianity. And there, right there, on the bottom of the pool, is an anchor with a bunch of fishes around it. Both dolphins and people are swimming toward a cruciform anchor, the universal symbol of safety. Fish are directly equated with people. And the Romans do that in their New Testament satire quite often. And the satire works with Josephus. So it's like the they set up parallels between what's going on in the New Testament and what's going on in the military campaign of Titus, as described by Josephus. The military campaign of Titus is a parallel to the ministry of Jesus, and so every play it goes in the same order in both books, and every place that Jesus goes, Titus also goes in the same order, and at each place they encounter parallel events. And in this case, with the fish, it starts out, Jesus' ministry starts out in Galilee, on the Sea of Galilee, on the fishing boat. He meets Simon and Andrew and convinces them to follow him and abandon their families and follow him. And he says, I will make you fishers of men. And then 40 years later, to the day, Titus is fighting a battle against the Jews on this very same lake. And or it's really a lake. It's called the Sea of Galilee, but it's really a small lake. And uh, some of the Jewish boats are overturned, and the Jews fall into the water. And Titus instructs his men to, when the Jews put their head above the water, you know, hit them with your spears and bring them in with your nets. So Titus is literally telling his men to become fishers of men. And in this case, the fish are Jews. And that is kind of another theme that goes throughout this satire, is that the Jews are equated to fish. And here he says, fish are directly equated with people. What deity the anchor represents is not clear, but what is striking about this mosaic is that the devotees of Apollo, Titus, or Jesus Christ could all have designed it with equal plausibility. The family of symbols and their meaning is identical to that employed by Christians in the earliest catacombs. And yet this mosaic predates all accepted archaeological evidence for Christianity. This image was captured in a time capsule by the eruption of Vesuvius during the brief reign of Titus. Titus ruled for 2 years, 2 months, and 20 days. Exactly 2 months after he succeeded his father as emperor, Vesuvius erupted. Since recent earthquakes rocking the area prior to eruption damaged much of Herculaneum, the other pool in the same gymnasium was under repair at the time. The fact that this pool had been filled and working when Vesuvius erupted implies it had been recently restored. As this public works was originally built by Augustus, numerous violent quakes had preceded the eruption in the previous months. It is probable that the restoration necessary to repair this pool had been commissioned by the Flavian emperors themselves. And now they're showing here is another first century pre-Christian Flavian artifact. It is an imaglio or an intaglio that predates any accepted archaeological evidence of Christianity. It is a hand-carved, opposite, and indented image, suggesting it may have been used by a wealthy Flavian or a Flavian official as a seal. Yet another extraordinary correlation with Jesus Christ appears when we look deeper into why the Emperor Titus would choose nautical imagery, especially considering that his campaign in Judea took place mostly in the desert. Titus was a talented general whose signal achievements as a military leader were his deeds during the Jewish revolt of 66 to 73, which earned him a Roman triumph and ultimately the imperial chair in Rome. The Judean conflict was not a naval affair, with one notable exception: the reduction of Jewish towns and cities around a certain very small landlocked body of water, the Sea of Galilee. After a minor engagement with Titus's forces, the city of Tiberias was on the shore of Galilee surrendered. But the rebel leader, Jesus ben Saphat, and it's important to point out that in Josephus, there are, I believe, 6 or 7 characters named Jesus. And they all are like a mockery of the Jesus in the New Testament in one way or another. So this Jesus ben Saphat, fled with his insurgents to a town called Terachia, also on the lake shore. Leading an elite cavalry unit, Titus bravely gave them chase to the plain outside that city's walls. Badly outnumbered there, Titus sent for reinforcements of 400 horses and 2,000 archers. Yet, after a rousing harangue from General Titus, the Roman forces rallied even before help could arrive. Once they did, Titus took Taricheae in a creative and bold assault, crossing over the Sea of Galilee on a hastily constructed fleet of rafts and striking the town's unfortified waterfront. Thousands of rebels from the town were driven into the sea, where the Romans mercilessly wiped them out. Writer Joseph Atwill, in his book Caesar's Messiah, has observed that the Roman army that day was literally fishing for men on the Sea of Galilee after the future emperor Titus had figuratively driven the demons into its waters. A lot of times they also equate the Jews with demons or being possessed by demons. Atwill has noted other parallels between Jesus's and Titus's activities as well that seem more than coincidental. Uh, According to Roman historian Barbara Levick, the importance of the engagement at Taricheae in Roman eyes, and perhaps its importance for Titus's glory, may be indicated by the number of ships in the joint triumphal procession of 71 AD and the allusions to it on the coinage. So the use of nautical symbols by Titus on his coins, Levick argues, was inspired in part by his heroic deeds on the Sea of Galilee, just as we have seen Christians adopted the same symbols in part to celebrate Jesus' miracles on the same small body of water. Christians use this symbol, and its near simultaneous use in Roman imperial propaganda is simply inexplicable by any conventional understanding of Christianity's origins. The correlation between the deeds of Jesus and those of Titus only adds more improbability to the already incredible coincidence. And, of course, the dating of the Gospels themselves coincides with the reign of the Flavians after their victory over Judea. Okay, we'll read one more short paragraph here. Since the dolphin and anchor motif was still circulating on Flavian coins, while Christians used this iconography in their earliest catacombs, we are compelled to take a closer look at the cults of the deified Flavian emperors Vespasian and Titus. Okay, so the cults of Vespasian and Titus are both invented religions by the Romans. They also invented the cults of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and Claudius Caesar. They also invented the cult of Flavia Domitilla, which was Vespasian's granddaughter. And they also invented the um, Jewish um, rabbinical Judaism, which is still around today. The Flavians gave this guy Yohanan Ben Zakkai a land grant to build a campus at Jamnia for the study of the ancient Jewish scriptures. And the idea there was to um, get the Jews out of their political, leanings and into the endless, you know, um, exegesis of their scriptures. Just going over every detail of it. And that is what is now known as rabbinical Judaism, and it led to both the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmuds. And so that is a Flavian sponsored religion, along with all those others. So it's certainly not any big stretch to think that Christianity was also created by the Flavians, especially when the evidence is overwhelming. Okay, like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and come back tomorrow for another episode of Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.